call me officially by the Tao prophets. Well, it's so crazy how prophets, prophet, like rhymes with prophets, P-R-F-I-T. I wonder if there's a connection. But yeah, um, I just came here to um, pin drop um, a, a fact and understanding or increased understanding about South African history. So earlier I did a post about how when slavery ended in 1806, the British government issued £20 million to slave owners, which could only be checked or received in England. And of course, the nature of South, you know that the Brits only came in around 1795 and started the occupation between that and 1806, the first British occupation, and later um, into 1820s they were like, yeah, we're staying here. You know, they found us. That was the first time they found us type thing happened. And then obviously this caused a lot of frustration for Afrikaners because by the Cape Colony being annexed, meaning that it was taken away from the Dutch, um, they didn't have any administrative power. On top of all of this, right, the Cape Colony was being anglicized, so meaning that it was made into an English state because Dutch and the mixture and the formations of Afrikaans were happening there, right? And so the Afrikaners got super angry by losing power, by also losing like slaves, so free labor, and were dissatisfied with the British government, and over time they wanted cheap labor, um, which is really crazy when we talk about Afrikaner identity and national identity of Afrikaners. We cannot remove the fact of cheap labor, free labor, and that is what they were like building up over time as they ventured inland, right, all the way to 18 about 1836 when they arrived in Pietermaritzburg and made it um, theirs in a way, and that's where you see Natalia, you see like all those buildings, the Dutch style buildings there, and only for 4 years did they remain there, where it was a republic, and Britain again found them. The Queen, the Crown found them, and then the Great Trek continued all the way to 1854, where they settled in the Orange River. And it's really interesting, like historians, the context in which they speak about black people, right? Even the Afrikaans and even, um, yeah, just the founding principles around what Afrikanerism is. Because when the Brits came through in 1806, they had like a philanthropist mindset, which said that every people should be like the same. So there shouldn't be like any divisions of class where people in society have specific rules and roles that they abide to, but everyone should be the same. And this was like a point of anger and anguish for the Afrikaners. And that's why you see later in 1948, they then go DEFCON 3, as Kanye would say, and made apartheid a policy. And I think it's super interesting just to have political chats about like land and who are the owners of land and how that came about, because you're seeing like the defeat of Dingaan, where in that 4 years that the Afrikaners spent in Pietermaritzburg, they removed like a lot of people there for greater land, and also they were removed in a way by the Brits. And you're seeing that in a way, black people are just like pawns, um, or just they're just hit by waves of um, whatever the powers that be are. And like history also emphasizes how um, power was exerted on them, in a way. And I think like in shedding that identity, because like in as much as like an English identity was super established in Britain, and they had their own cultures, social structures, and all of that, and you see like Afrikaners as well, like characterizing their own identity. If we look at history, then it's not far-fetched in saying that our identity is closely linked to like cheap labor, closely linked to being disenfranchised, and that's why I think it's easy for us to understand. There's so much understanding in us, and just saying that the forces of economics and politics are something not in our control. And so that's why I'm a tall prophet right now. And yeah, getting into um, a different mindset around even what it means to be, or like vocation, economic, political involvement. And with this, I can hope that, yeah, when I do start a party, tall profits. But with this, also, I'm crystallizing in my head around what it means um, to be black and black consciousness, and like in the present day, and just to understand like how our behavior is closely linked to our past, and how we view ourselves is closely linked to our past. And also like in the context of like psychology, because like right now we only have like mental snapshots, like we have behavioral conditioning that is based off of this. And in terms of like thoughts that were proposed by like your Steve Biko's and Frantz Fanon's about just the split of black identity, I think it's important to know like what's really at stake and why we do the things that we do. Because at the end of the day, like so much of our identity is just held in employment, the lack thereof, or not, or the having, or just upgrades there. And you realize that this whole idea of cheap labor is still prevalent. The whole idea of just not having executive control over our political and economic lives, which is one of the reasons that the Afrikaners were like, nah. And I think sometimes we have to like assimilate to associate, because yeah, what what is called black identity in a way is sort of imposed on so many levels. I think about like the sort of blaseness in which historians write about black people as kafirs. It's not even redacted, it's not even changed. No one like thinks about that, and even till this day, I'm sure new material reference that. When they're referencing blacks in a specific place, how um, even that whole idea of now blacks, is kind of getting um, a distasteful sound to it, and I think that it gets increasingly important to be mindful of where we are in the world, you know and like, what does this all really mean? Because it's like, nationally we're all being gaslit, in terms of like land chats, in terms of like politics and all of that, because no one is really referencing our true history, and talking about how land was taken. Land was really taken by war, by guns, you know. Um, but now there's no sort of upfront or objective way to rectify that, because so much has been built, and so many things have happened. There's no paper trail, especially for black people, because you think about initially when the Hottentots were like driven out of the areas in Cape Town around the 1600s, that Jan van Riebeck then started issuing title deeds and all of that, whereas there was no legislative or paperwork done to drive people out except guns, and this happened again over and over. Um, and you like, logically, as people, would this not frustrate you? Would you not think of this and it have a bitter taste in your mouth, that now it's like as if none of this actually happened, you know? Like, I think about this a lot, especially when I'm home, looking at the landscape and seeing like the many acres of farms that like these three German guys have, you know? And like, when I hear stories about how my grandpops as well would have great grandfather would have like his cows taken from him, you know, imagine, and having moved all the way from Swaziland to Pietermaritzburg, and I'm like, was he alone? Was there other people? What was happening there? The context, and that's so interesting. Is that obviously we, as being pursued and like fighting for our lives, would never have the time to actually document these things, because also there's like an air of um, life changing on its head, and then now having to assimilate in order to capture these things, because like being characterized and ideally your identity being labor, you have no time for these things. Like, think about commutes, 4-hour commutes just to get to work every day for like half the market rates and all of that, and that's like more than 50% of black people in a way. It makes me think about what a community that is truly black would look like, because you see like black affluence in maybe places like Midrand and all of that and Sandton, but it doesn't have the social essence of blackness, where you look someone in the eye and it's just like you just saw a tree or something. You just saw like um, a street pole or something, which further like exacerbates or strengthens the case of Steve Biko and Frantz Fanon, saying that we know black identity based on colonial eyes, and in a way we keep alienating ourselves from that, because when you talk about the world as a whole and how love is the most powerful force, I think that in a way it's being corroded by like our lived experiences and also the triggers that we've made our own over the years, you know, um, through non-expression, through the concepts of imbogodo, the concepts of indoda is XYZ and all of that, and not really like coming to terms with the most influential things that have shaped who we are. And also like my history readings has been based on like wanting to understand the the religious background of South Africa, or religion in a sense. And it's super interesting that this same religion, which we love so much, was one of the reasons that Afrikaners were angry about being categorized as the same as black people, you know, because religiously that's not it. And why would we use the same religion to govern our spiritual lives, govern like the unseen? And it's worth asking, you know, in terms of like our identity. You know, you think about the involvement of black people in uniforms, in like really expanding their resources for the sake of God, you know. And my my perspective around that is that psychologically there is a miss or like cognitive dissonance in the sense that all the arts that depicts heaven, that depicts angels, it doesn't have representation. If we're crying out for representation on our TV screens, how much more on a spiritual sense, how much more on things of greater weighting like our religious orientation? Yabo. And what bearing does that have on our minds? What bearings does it have in our outlook? And I think that it's really important for us to have sight of how Western civilization has developed, in that once upon a time it was a monolithic civilization where no, a polylithic, where it like had many gods. That's why you have Venus, you have, you know, Orion, Thor, and all of that. And over time it developed. And so what does black spirituality look like in terms of development? I think that one of the most key pieces is looking to the body as a reference for understanding and seeing the world, you know, looking to nature, because there's nothing that has to be written about the body in order for you to like see it for what it is. You don't have to believe anything, you know, like when you're out in nature and you have an experience that is has been true since the beginning of time, where your nervous system relaxes, you're able to observe things, you're able to um, feel like more of yourself, have thoughts with yourself, laugh at yourself, and just have a real-time software upgrade. And I think that spirituality for us, especially like when we're always flexing about melanin and like having a high propensity for the sun and all of that, what does that really mean? Is it just a flex, you know? And I think like we should officially administer that as, in a way, our religion. Like umuntu ngabantu is our religion in a way, because it's a sure way of knowledge transference. It's a sure way of survival. It's a sure way of like just taking care of one's spirit, being with other people, you know, and being with self again. So this also is like just snippets of that happening for me, where me sharing this with you is one of the principles of this, saying that um, software upgrades are needed. And if we look like bar for bar at history and look at like the different distinctions of like Europeans, the different you know, pockets of history as well, we can see that there's some crazy developments that are linked to the natural environment or the surrounding environment, even in terms of thoughts and action. And I think that that is due even for us, like just history is exposing our psychological makeup. It's exposing our deeply held fears and you know uh, just perspectives, which is really important then to have like a an objective or clearer lens around what this is. And conversation, I think, is one of the ways in which we're able to interrogate something. That's why I've been looking at the whole concept of triggers and how triggers works, where you have words that feel loaded for you, and that's based on your own subjective experience, and that can be interacted with and cleansed in a way through conversation as well. It's almost like the mind has multiple rooms that sometimes we don't want to go into, and like seeing conversation like that is quite empowering. Seeing like word usage and how like we're able to express our thoughts using our native language easier than it is for English, and understanding those distinctions is such a key piece of what I think is and should be happening. So, Tau Prophets signing out. This is from a this is from a reading of the ongoing book. I'm reading 500 Years of South Africa, and just understanding the psychology of the world that we live in. I think that it's important for us not to take things at face value, and it's important for us not to have like this toxic positive outlook on the nature of things. And I feel like black identity is obsessed with moral goodness, is obsessed with being good people, is obsessed with in a way peace, much to our detriment. That our morality is influenced by multiple influences, and if we do not have sight of the sources of those influences, it's easy then for us to be swayed, and from a moral standpoint, which is not even necessarily true. Think about how morally incorrect not going to church is, not like subscribing to Jesus is. And yet, if you look at the history behind all of this, you're seeing bloodshed. You're seeing like inhumanity, and yet the blood of Christ is the most important, right? And if we get emotional reactions around what kinds of blood have been shed, and cannot sympathize with our own and not sympathize with our current experience, I think you have, as a result, some crazy dissonance, an alienation towards ourselves, an alienation towards like what is real. And we just live life waiting to go to heaven, you know, and trying to get to heaven using means that are subjectively sus and objectively sus as well. And think about how um, the whole idea of Christianity has separated families, has like created lifetimes of trauma based on that moral goodness, you know, which is like really interesting. There's facts around that, and this is just like to paint how subjectivity, like fueled by emotional energy, can like just change things and dictate so many things in our lives, you know. Um, like when looking at history here, it's like at some point when the British went after the Afrikaners, right? There was hectic hectic army involvement, you know, very hectic army involvement, and the subjects, which were black people, that would be like the calamities or like just byproducts of what was ever happening, were housed in like churches and only to be primed to be like labor, you know? Because if you think about it, if the Afrikaners weren't vibing with us being in church, and back home, Eswayimane, there's a Dutch Reformed church, what does that really mean? If like the pioneers of this are anti, and over time it's like, okay, obviously you guys are fighting us for taking your stuff, so how do we like make you relax, you know? God will provide and all of that. And you're seeing like a recruiting of other black people to tone down others, where now there's like a powerful mfundisi, a prophet or whatever, you know. And it's super important to realize that like um, for all the pivots in history, there was black people fighting against their own, like Utingani, you know. He was together with missionaries, like even the guys that fought against the King Shweshwe in Lesotho, you know, they were using missionaries at some point, you know. And you're like, what is happening here, you know? So I'm really sus about this, especially like now in the context of even that Native Affairs Commission, which was done by the British government in 1906, um, was just painting psychological orientations of black people and prescribing church as a way to control and make them predictable in a way, so that like the wheels of commerce can carry on, you know. And all this to say what, yeah, I don't know.